Welcome to the Psychology of Power. Today, we are looking at Edward VI, England's boy king, and asking a darker question: did power make him ruthless? Edward is often remembered as fragile, young, and heavily influenced by the men around him. But his story is more complicated. He was not only shaped by power, he learned how to use it. Through faith, family, succession, and control, Edward's short reign reveals how even a child king could become a force in Tudor politics. When we think about Edward VI, it is easy to see only the fragile boy king. But that image is incomplete. Edward became king at just 9 years old, surrounded by ambitious adults, religious reformers, and political advisors who all understood the value of his crown. He did not rule in isolation, but he was also not merely a powerless child. His reign existed in that tension, a young king shaped by the men around him, yet increasingly aware that his name, his authority, and his throne could be used to reshape England. Edward's importance began before he ever became king. He was the son Henry VIII had spent much of his reign trying to secure, the male heir meant to protect the Tudor dynasty from uncertainty. But when Edward inherited the throne at only 9 years old, the kingdom did not simply belong to him. It became the center of a struggle among powerful men. His uncle Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset, first ruled as Lord Protector, but his authority eventually collapsed. Then John Dudley, Duke of Northumberland, rose in influence. Around Edward, power was never still. It shifted, tightened, and forced the young king to learn that the throne was not only inherited, it had to be defended. Religion was not a side issue in Edward's reign. It was the center of his vision for England. Edward was deeply committed to Protestant reform, and under his rule, religion became more than private belief. It became a way to define loyalty, authority, and the future of the kingdom. To Edward, Catholic resistance was not simply disagreement. It threatened the kind of England he believed God wanted him to build. This is where his youth becomes psychologically interesting. Edward was young, but he was not uncertain. His faith gave him structure, certainty, and purpose in a court filled with instability. Through religion, Edward learned that power could be used not only to rule people, but to reshape what they believed. Edward's Protestantism was not a quiet belief. It became one of the strongest forces behind his rule. As he grew older, Edward saw himself not just as a king, but as a godly ruler with a duty to protect Protestant England. That made compromise difficult. His Catholic half-sister Mary became a problem not only because she disagreed with him, but because her faith challenged the future he wanted to create. Edward pressured her to abandon the Mass, and when she resisted, the conflict became deeply personal and political. This is where Edward begins to look less like a fragile boy and more like a ruler willing to use power against his own family when faith and succession were at stake. Mary's conflict with Edward reveals just how serious his Protestant vision had become. Mary refused to give up Catholic worship, and to Edward, that refusal was not simply private devotion. It was defiance. She was his sister, but she also represented the old Catholic world he wanted England to leave behind. Edward and his council pressured her repeatedly over the Mass, and Mary resisted with the same stubborn certainty that defined her own faith. This created a dangerous psychological mirror between them, two Tudor siblings, both convinced they were defending the true religion, both unwilling to yield. For Edward, controlling Mary was not just about family discipline. It was about protecting the Protestant future he believed England needed. The conflict over Mary's Mass became one of the clearest tests of Edward's authority. Mary did not simply disagree with Protestant reform. She openly continued Catholic worship, which made her a living challenge to Edward's vision for England. For Edward, allowing Mary to keep the Mass meant allowing Catholic resistance to survive inside the royal family itself. That made the issue deeply personal and politically dangerous. His council pushed pressure onto Mary, but Edward's own beliefs mattered too. He was not just watching from the sidelines. He increasingly saw Mary's Catholicism as a threat to the religious future he wanted to protect. In that struggle, Edward began using the throne not only to govern England, but to discipline his own bloodline. As Edward's health declined, his use of power became even clearer. He did not passively accept the succession Henry VIII had left behind. Instead, he tried to reshape it. Edward moved to exclude both Mary and Elizabeth from the throne and name Lady Jane Grey as his successor. This was not just a family decision. It was a political and religious act. Mary was Catholic, Elizabeth's claim was complicated, and Jane represented the Protestant future Edward wanted to protect. In his final months, Edward used the crown to reach beyond his own lifetime. He tried to decide not only who would rule after him, but what kind of England would survive him. Edward's decision shows that his power was not only symbolic. Even as a dying teenager, he understood that succession was one of the strongest tools a monarch possessed. By attempting to remove Mary and Elizabeth and place Lady Jane Grey in line for the throne, Edward was not simply following advice. He was trying to control the future. This is where Edward becomes psychologically fascinating. He had learned that power was not only about ruling in the present. It was about shaping what came after you. His final act was not weakness. It was control over religion, control over family, and control over England's future. Edward VI's story reveals a darker side of Tudor power. He was young, fragile, and surrounded by ambitious adults, but he was not powerless. By the end of his life, Edward had learned how to use the crown to defend his faith, discipline his family, and attempt to control the future of England. His decision to exclude Mary and Elizabeth and name Lady Jane Grey showed how deeply religion, bloodline, and authority had fused in his mind. So did power make Edward VI ruthless? In many ways, yes, not because he was cruel for pleasure, but because he believed control was necessary to preserve the England he wanted. Edward's tragedy is that he died as both a child and a king, young enough to be vulnerable, but powerful enough to change history. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel and come back for more videos.